Welcome to Leadership is Dead, the podcast that challenges traditional leadership thinking and explores what it really means to lead in a post-COVID world. Each week, we dive into fresh insights and strategies brought to you by leadership expert Dr. Neil McIntyre. Each week, our hosts Liam Williams and Ava Brown take you through thought-provoking discussions based on Dr. McIntyre's latest writings and ideas, which are designed to help you rethink what leadership can be. But before Liam and Ava dive in, let's hear directly from Dr. McIntyre himself as he shares a few words on today's topic. Get ready, because he's here to set the stage for what's coming up.
You know, each year, individuals and organizations literally spend billions of dollars on things surrounding the topic of leadership. You know, whether that may be leadership books, whether it may be leadership workshops or seminars or conferences or, whatever. We spend billions of dollars a year on that topic. So it leaves you to question then that if we have spent many years spending that amount of money on leadership development, why is it that our society is lacking in authentic leadership? Because see, if you look at our society, whether it's on a national scale, local scale, or even an organizational scale, I think what you really see if you take a very, very close, honest look at things is that we have a lot of problems, and it's all linked to a lack of leadership. Well, obviously, this leads to the notion that somewhere along the way, past leadership has gone wrong. Now, granted, people, as I mentioned a few moments ago, have read numerous books and they've attended numerous workshops and seminars on leadership. And I'm not necessarily saying that the material that they were exposed to was faulty material, because I don't think that is the case. I think that what we've seen in reality is that when people take these principles and values and material that they learn in these seminars and through reading these books, and they take it and transform over to their work environments, that there's a disconnect there. And I really believe there's some core foundational things that have been common of all of this material that's led to what we see today as far as the void of leadership. So there's really three areas that I believe have largely contributed to the weakness of leadership in the past, and that has led to our lack of leadership now. The first thing that I believe has contributed to that is confusing management with leadership. Now, granted, one of the first things that you will read in a leadership book, or one of the first things that you'll be exposed to in a leadership seminar, is the distinguishing characteristics of management and the distinguishing characteristics of leadership and how those two are different. But here's what you wind up seeing, is that in that book or in that seminar, you'll be exposed to a lot of principles and values and beliefs and behaviors that leaders are supposed to take part in, and that's supposed to be part of their very being. But there becomes a disconnect when they leave that book, when they leave that seminar or workshop, and they go back to their workplace and they're exposed to everyday reality again. There's something that happens in that shift, because when they go back to the workforce, for example, you have to look at how do we reward people in a work environment. Most of our reward structures are basically focused on having the display of certain metrics that usually involve the concept of production or productivity. If you're in a factory, for example, your success in that factory will be judged by how many widgets or whatever it is that you produce. It'll be determined by how many items you produce. It's quantity, okay? If you're in a sales team, it's going to be based off of how many sales you have made and also the value of those sales. So when you look at the reward mechanisms and processes within organizations, basically what they do, they reward management activities. They very rarely reward leadership activities. So with that, you may have somebody that you have just spent time and money sending them to a leadership development seminar, and they have learned all of these great things. Now they've come back to the workforce and they're wanting to implement what they have been taught into their everyday life on the job. But when everything gets down to the nitty-gritty, that person understands that they're not going to be evaluated and even rewarded based off of the activities of a leader. Instead, they're going to be evaluated and rewarded based on activities that follow underneath the umbrella of management. So with that, there's that natural tendency then, if I'm going to get evaluated and a reward by this, then this is what I'm going to do. So with that, a lot of times our organizations unknowingly reward management and really do nothing to reinforce the value and necessity of leadership. Now, the second reason that I believe that we have seen a disconnect between what's been taught and read in leadership, books, seminars, all that kind of stuff, is that we have failed to connect everything that we read and everything that we've been exposed to in terms of leadership. We've failed to connect that to the mission of the organization in which the person works. And we've also failed to connect the dots and show how that individual's passions and aspirations and ambitions fall underneath and align with their job duties and leadership principles. So what you have here is more or less a disconnected reality where you have a person that's gone through this leadership development program or training session, and everything that they have been taught has been great and wonderful. But when they get back to the real world, they don't know exactly how to piece those leadership concepts to with what their business is really trying to do from a mission standpoint, and they most certainly can't really understand how their individual passions play a role in obtaining the mission of the organization or even taking part in leadership behaviors itself. So we've done a very poor job of helping them to connect the pieces of the puzzle, and we've basically enabled them to basically construct a fractured viewpoint or perspective of their life where leadership is kind of sort of on its own island. Their work life is on a separate piece that's isolated by itself, and it really leads to a lack of effective performance. Now, the third and final thing that I firmly believe has led to faulty leadership practices in the past, or even ineffective leadership practices in the past, has been that, leadership is about uniting and inspiring and motivating and creating fulfilling, cohesive teams, okay? So leadership is about leading a group and unifying them on a singular mission or vision or purpose. Well, here's the thing. A lot of leaders and organizations take pride in their teams being unified and cohesive. But the disconnect there is that whenever it comes time to evaluate team performance and even reward team performance, the processes to do that are all geared to evaluate and reward people on individual levels. So even though we may practice and talk about this whole construction that we're a team and there's no I in team, that we're all in this together, our processes of evaluation and rewards doesn't reinforce that. Our processes of evaluation and rewards generally reinforce this whole concept of individuality, where your individual efforts and performance are going to be weighed on their own merits outside of what the overall group has achieved. So with that, it's very difficult for, say, somebody who has just gone through a leadership development course to go back into the workforce and basically want to operate within their team structure as if they are a cohesive, unified team, because that leader will know that each person will be evaluated and rewarded on an individual level, including themselves. Case in point here, several years ago, this was back when I still worked with probation, and I worked as a team with the intensive probation supervision officer, and he was actually my immediate supervisor, and we were expected to go out and conduct home visits and checks on our probation caseload very regularly. Now, it was taught to us very early on in my career with probation that you don't just aim for minimum expectations here. You go above and beyond that. And there was one year that me and my supervisor, we had several thousand extra visits on our probationers on our case list in that year. And of course, our supervisors, the chief and the office manager, they praised both of us for those efforts and the results and things. But when it came down to the evaluation and reward period, well, I found out later on that my supervisor got an extra bonus for those extra contacts. And here it was, I received nothing. So even though we were expected to operate as a team, the reward mechanisms were all facing and supporting individual efforts. So where does all of this lead now? Well, going forward, we need more effective leadership. We need individuals who are aware of the systemic problems that basically undermine real, authentic leadership in organizations. And with that, we need to develop entities, organizations that have a singular focus on rewarding leadership and leadership strategies and behaviors, and not simply just rewarding those actions that take part underneath the role of management, and also rewarding teams on team metrics instead of individuals. Now, if we can develop a leadership that is focused on what true leadership is and actually rewards teams on the basis of team efforts and team outcomes, and we're able to also connect leadership principles and behaviors and strategies to organizational mission and individual passions, what you will see is a tremendous transformation in work organizations today that will also extend out into the community and also the personal lives of the individuals involved in that whole environment. With that, you will see significant change on a national and even worldwide scale.
Wow. I don't know about you, but I am still kind of reeling after Dr. McIntyre's talk on leadership. It really got me thinking. You know, why is it that with all the time and money we spend on developing leaders, we still see such a lack of authentic leadership?
Oh, it's a question that really resonates, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, we are just inundated with leadership development resources. We've got books, workshops, conferences. Yet, genuine, impactful leadership seems to be so rare. And Dr. McIntyre really highlighted that kind of contradiction.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars poured into these initiatives every year.
Yeah. It's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Society is grappling with leadership challenges on every level, national, local, and organizations. But Dr. McIntyre doesn't seem to think that the problem is the material itself.
No, he thinks that it's this disconnect between what we are learning and what we're actually putting into practice.
Right.
It's like we're learning one thing and then getting rewarded for doing something else entirely.
Right.
Which is where he brings up those three kind of fascinating but troubling issues that he sees.
Yeah. Let's unpack those, shall we?
Let's do
The
it.
first one that really stood out to me was this whole idea of confusing management and leadership.
Oh, yeah. Even though most leadership development programs will, they emphasize this distinction between management and leadership. But the reality is that I think a lot of organizations end up rewarding management behaviors over leadership qualities. Their incentive structures are all built around those numbers, production, sales, efficiency, rather than fostering things like creativity, collaboration, or, really inspiring your teams.
So imagine like someone goes to a leadership seminar, comes back full of new ideas about empowering their team, ready to put those inspiring ideas into action. But then their performance review comes around.
Right. And they're judged just on those production numbers. It's
Yeah.
like the system discourages them from using those leadership skills that they were so excited about. It's like we're setting people up to fail.
So it's a real catch-22.
Yeah.
And this leads perfectly to the second issue that Dr. McIntyre brought up, the disconnect between leadership principles and the heart of an organization, its mission, as well as the individual's own passions.
Yes. And that's where it gets really interesting because it's not just about skills, it's about purpose.
Yeah.
Leadership development, I think it often fails to really bridge that gap between the principles that are being taught and how those principles connect to both the organization's driving force and the individual's own motivations.
So it becomes this kind of fragmented experience.
Yeah.
Leadership is treated as like a separate skill set divorced from the work being done and who the person is at their core.
Exactly. It's like you're giving someone all these tools, but you're not explaining how they relate to the blueprint of the house they're building,
Right.
And without that connection to the bigger picture, leadership just feels so hollow and ineffective.
Okay. I'm seeing how these issues are starting to kind of build on each other.
Yeah.
And Dr. McIntyre hit us with that third one, the emphasis on teamwork, but rewarding individuals.
Ah, yes, the classic contradiction.
Right.
So many organizations, they sing the praises of teamwork, of unity, but when it comes down to performance evaluations, rewards, they tend to just focus on individual achievements.
It just sends such a mixed message.
It does.
Like, work together, but we're going to judge you separately.
Work together, but we'll judge you separately. And Dr. McIntyre gave this really powerful anecdote from his own experience to illustrate this point. He was working in probation. He and his supervisor, they went above and beyond, making thousands of extra visits to probationers. But even though their efforts were lauded, only his supervisor got a bonus.
What a clear example of the system undermining its own message.
Right. It really creates this dissonance between, the stated values of teamwork and the actual practice of just rewarding individual performance. It really makes you wonder how many great leaders are out there who are discouraged or disengaged because of this.
Yeah, that is a sobering thought. So essentially, Dr. McIntyre is arguing that to cultivate genuine leadership, we have to look beyond just training individuals and really examine these deeper systemic issues that might be holding people back.
Absolutely. It's about creating an environment where leadership is genuinely valued, supported, and rewarded at every level.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets really fascinating because Dr. McIntyre, he doesn't just leave us with the problems. He offers this really hopeful vision for the future where authentic leadership can flourish.
It was inspiring to hear him talk about creating organizations that actually prioritize leadership.
Yeah.
At every level, not just the top.
He believes that if we can do that, the positive impact, it would ripple outwards. It would affect not just organizations, but the communities they serve, the individuals within those communities.
Okay, that's a powerful thought. So what resonated most with you from his talk? Was it the disconnect between management and leadership, or the failure to connect to purpose? Or was it the conflicting emphasis on teamwork versus individual reward?
I mean, they're all so intertwined, aren't they? But what really hit home for me was how these issues aren't just about individual failings, they're about these systemic barriers
Yeah.
that we've kind of come to accept as just the way things are.
Yeah. It's so easy to just point fingers. But Dr. McIntyre's insights really challenge us to look beyond just individual behavior and examine the structures and incentives that actually shape that behavior. That's where the real work lies.
Yeah, it requires a real fundamental shift in our thinking, a willingness to question, those long-held assumptions about how organizations should operate, what success really even means. It's not just about tweaking policies.
Right. So how do we even begin to tackle those deeply ingrained issues? Where do we even start?
Well, Dr. McIntyre, he offered some really insightful clues. He emphasized aligning reward systems with leadership behaviors, connecting leadership principles with organizational mission, individual passion, evaluating and rewarding teams as cohesive units, not just individuals.
So it's about creating a system that actually nurtures and supports authentic leadership instead of inadvertently stifling it.
Yeah, fostering an environment where people actually feel empowered to lead, their leadership skills are valued, they can see how their contributions are making a difference.
That sounds incredible, but I have to admit it also feels a bit daunting. It's like trying to turn a giant ship around.
It's definitely a big challenge, but I don't think it's impossible, and here's why. Every system is made up of individuals. Each individual has that power to challenge the status quo, advocate for change, and most importantly, lead by example.
So even small actions can make a difference. I like that.
Absolutely. Think about it. If enough people start asking the right questions, pushing back against those outdated practices, demonstrating the value of authentic leadership, those ripples, they spread throughout an organization and even beyond.
Like a domino effect, where one small change triggers a cascade of transformations. It feels less overwhelming when you think of it that way.
And that's what makes Dr. McIntyre's vision so compelling. It's not this, utopian ideal. It's a possibility that we can actually work towards step by step, action by action.
I love that. It reminds me of that quote, "The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step."
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most valuable takeaways. It's a call to action. It's an invitation for all of us to become more conscious, more intentional, more courageous in how we approach leadership.
And to never underestimate the power of those individual actions to create positive change, even when it seems small.
Because ultimately, leadership isn't about titles. It's not about positions. It's a mindset. It's a set of values. And that commitment to making a positive impact.
And those are qualities that anyone can cultivate, no matter what role they have.
Which brings us to a really hopeful realization. Each of us has that potential to be a leader, to inspire others, to contribute to creating a better world.
That resonates with me a lot. It's a message we all need to hear, especially now. There's so much power in reclaiming that sense of agency, recognizing that we can all make a difference.
It's a message of hope, empowerment, and possibility. And I really do believe that it can change the world.
So what can our listeners do to actually start putting these ideas into practice, concrete steps to become more effective leaders?
I think one of the most important things is to just start by reflecting on your own leadership style. What are your strengths? What are your areas for growth?
That's a good starting point. Something you can do right now, no matter where you are. No training required.
Right. Once you have a better understanding of your leadership style, you can start to identify opportunities to put those skills into practice. It might be at work, in your community, even in your everyday interactions with people.
It's about finding those moments where you can step up, lead by example, make a positive difference, however big or small.
Looking for those opportunities to inspire people, build relationships, work together towards a common goal.
And never underestimate the power of those actions to create a ripple effect.
Because as Dr. McIntyre reminded us, leadership isn't just about what we do, it's about who we are, the impact we have on the world.
That's such a powerful message. It's a reminder that leadership isn't some, distant concept. It's something that we can embody every day in our own unique ways.
And that's what makes this so exciting. It's an invitation for all of us to discover our own leadership potential and use it to create a more just, compassionate, sustainable world.
It's a beautiful vision, and I think one worth striving for.
Absolutely. I believe that together we can make it a reality.
I love your optimism.
Well, I have to give credit where it's due. Dr. McIntyre's talk was incredibly inspiring. It reminded me of the power of hope, the importance of action, and the potential that exists within each of us to create change.
I agree. I think that's a perfect note to transition to something Dr. McIntyre shared that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
That story about working in probation. Remember, when he described going above and beyond with his supervisor, making thousands of extra visits to probationers, they acknowledged both their efforts, but only the supervisor got the bonus.
Oh, it's such a perfect example of that disconnect we were talking about between the value of teamwork and then rewarding individuals. You know, even when you embrace collaboration and exceed expectations, the system still prioritizes individual recognition, and that undermines the collective effort.
It makes you wonder how many people are out there who have so much leadership potential, but then their enthusiasm gets chipped away by these experiences. How many great ideas just get stifled because the system doesn't support collaboration and shared success?
Yeah, it raises all these questions about the hidden cost of these systemic issues. It's not just about fairness. It's about, potentially missing out on the power of teams and individuals who could achieve so much more if the environment really fostered and celebrated leadership, authentic leadership.
So it sounds like cultivating a culture of authentic leadership really requires a deeper commitment than just like changing policies or doing a workshop every now and then. It's about shifting the underlying values and beliefs that shape how an organization works.
Yeah, it's about creating a culture where leadership is valued, not just in words, but in actions, where people feel encouraged to collaborate, to innovate, and where success is measured by the achievements of the whole team, not just individual metrics.
But that kind of change can be so challenging. It's not something that just happens overnight.
No, it definitely takes time and effort and a willingness to really challenge those ingrained patterns. But Dr. McIntyre's message does offer, I think, hope. He believes change is possible, that we can create organizations that foster and reward authentic leadership, and that those organizations can then have a ripple effect and influence positive change in society as a whole.
I think that's a really powerful and inspiring message for our listeners today. Even though the challenges might feel big, we all have a part to play in creating a better future. And it starts with recognizing our own potential to be leaders.
And remembering that leadership isn't just reserved for people at the top. It's something we can all embody every day in our own way through our actions, choices, and our interactions with others.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, is there any final thought you want to leave our listeners with?
I just encourage everyone to think about what resonated most with them from Dr. McIntyre's talk, what sparked their curiosity, what challenged their assumptions, and what action, however small, can they take today to bring more authentic leadership into their lives and the world around them.
That's a great point. Well, this has been a really insightful conversation. We'll be back next week with another deep dive into a new topic, exploring new perspectives and sparking those meaningful conversations. Until then, thanks for joining us.
That's all for this week on Leadership is Dead. A big thank you to our hosts, Liam Williams and Ava Brown, for their insightful discussion and analysis. And of course, a special thanks to Dr. Neil McIntyre, whose writings and thought leadership have provided the foundation for this podcast. If you're looking for more information on leadership strategies for a post-COVID world, be sure to visit Dr. McIntyre's website at neilmcintyreconsulting.com. You can also connect with him on LinkedIn by searching for Dr. Neil McIntyre. Remember, leadership is evolving, and it's time to embrace new approaches. Subscribe to Leadership is Dead wherever you get your podcasts, and join us next week for another enlightening discussion. Until then, lead with purpose.